President Trump and Kim Jong-un have met face-to-face for the very first time. The historic moment unfolded about 2 hours ago when the pair shook hands at the Capella Hotel on Sentosa Island in front of a backdrop of American and North Korean flags. What a moment that was. A few minutes later, we heard from them.
I feel really great. We're going to have a great discussion, and I think tremendous success. We'll be tremendously successful.
The president went on to say he thinks that they will have a, quote, terrific relationship. Kim Jong-un said, quote, it was not easy to get here. They held a one-on-one meeting behind closed doors for about 38 minutes. After that, they had an expanded meeting with their top advisors. Now the pair are holding a working lunch. Here you see pictures from that just moments ago. This is the last scheduled event for them for this summit. Joining me now to talk more about this, Ambassador Joseph Detrani. He's a former director of the National Counterproliferation Center, former special envoy for six-party talks with North Korea. We are resetting here, Ambassador, again, talking about that historic moment that we just witnessed here moments ago. But we started the hour here with sort of a playback of President Trump's, what he called the maximum pressure campaign, with fire and fury and some of the rhetoric that he used, ultimately ratcheting it down to the point where we are today. Just give us a sense of what you thought, going back all those months ago when the president talked about fire and fury and he talked about Little Rocket Man, and where we are today to see this historic moment happening between these two leaders.
It's immense. 8 months ago, the possibility of stumbling into conflict on the Korean Peninsula was real. It was with us. There's no doubt that maximum pressure, the economic sanctions, ensuring that, countries like China and others implemented those sanctions. They were biting. Those enhanced military exercises, they had to be intimidating for Pyongyang when you saw strategic assets coming into the region. There's no question. But also 2017, you had Kim Jong-un feeling pretty good about himself with the missile delivery systems to include an intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the whole of the U.S., a hydrogen bomb. So you have two pieces there, which speaks to where we are today. We were on the cusp of possibly stumbling into conflict. Now we're on the cusp of looking at a peaceful resolution to what's happening on the Korean Peninsula because of North Korea's nuclear program, mainly, that there are other issues. And I'll tell you something else. Looking at the delegation that Kim Jong-un is, just looking at those pictures of the delegation with Kim Jong-un, it's impressive because people sitting around that table with him, like his foreign minister, Lee Young-ho, a man whom I met with a number of times when he was the first vice foreign minister, knows the U.S. very well, was the ambassador up in New York, knows us well. Lee Soo-young, who was the ambassador in Switzerland, knows the world very well, and certainly Kim Jong-un very well. Kim Yong-chol, who was just here a few weeks ago, also knows South Korea, but knows us very well. His sister, Kim Yo-jung. So he's there with people who know the outside world, certainly know the U.S., and that tells me something else. I think he is prepared to make that move, given the delegation he has, and given that he realizes 8 months ago there was the possibility of stumbling into conflict, and he's not suicidal. As Matthew and you all have indicated, he wants to live a long life and a good life. So he knows he needs to move away from that and go on to a different vector, and that vector would be a normal relationship with the U.S.
And Ambassador, as we've been saying all along, President Trump deserves the credit for getting the United States to this point here because of that campaign of maximum pressure that he has applied through a combination of the rhetoric and, of course, the sanctions. I wonder, though, given your experience, your history, and that of other presidents with North Korea, does it seem to you that all we really needed was a change agent, a disruptor like Donald Trump, to grab the bull by the horns and say, you know what, I don't care what others did before me. I don't care what other presidents tried to do. I'm going to do it my way. I operate on gut. I operate on instinct. And this is what I'm doing. This is my path forward. And perhaps a lot of people who have a lot of experience in diplomacy sort of scratched their heads and said, what are we doing? This is not the right way to go. And look, here we are today.
Those are all excellent points. There's no question about it. What President Donald Trump did was a bold move. And I don't think any of the advisors would be saying this is the process you use. It's usually the other way around. You work it through the bottom level and you work it up. But he said 25 years of failed negotiations, why not? And you asked the question about, in the past, why didn't it work with other presidents? And I think my response to that would be because I think Kim Jong-il and then his father, Kim Il-sung, and the grandfather of Kim Jong-un, they wanted both. They wanted a normal relationship with the U.S. while being a nuclear weapon state, and now they realize very clearly with President Donald Trump, you can't have both. It's got to be one way. And here's a man who's sitting down with them. No other president, in my personal view, because we were never close to having a meaningful, implementable agreement, no other president would sit down with him. Here's a president who's sitting down with him. This is something North Korea has asked for decades. Certainly during my 12-plus years working with the North Koreans, they always said, if we could only meet with your president and our leader can meet with him, we could resolve these issues. Now they have the opportunity of resolving those issues.
It is fascinating indeed. Ambassador, stand by. I want to bring in Gabe Lipton and Willis Sparks. They're both joining me here in New York. Both are signal writers for G0 Media and CBSN contributors. Gabe, to you first. Welcome, first of all.
Good to be with you.
Good to see you. So you've been taking this all in. What are your impressions in the last couple of hours, given what we've seen?
Yeah, so I mean, they sort of opened the last 20 minutes with all these statements from Trump, and you know, it's a remarkable. The optics are remarkable of Trump and Kim sitting next to one another, and we talked a bit about Trump's unprecedented sort of approach to this. But if we look back, not just at sort of the happenings in the U.S. and the happenings in Korea, there are a bunch of sort of things that align to make this work. You had the impeachment of a president in South Korea, Park Chung-hee, who was much harder towards the north, and Moon Jae-in, president, came into power, and he sort of had a new policy. Typically, South Korean when South Korean presidents have taken more amenable approaches to the north, they've been more willing to discuss. Obviously, we've talked about Trump and his sort of willingness to scrap what had been previous diplomatic protocol on the U.S. side. But we should also look at Kim Jong-un and this young, youthful leader who took over his country in 2011 under immense uncertainty. People weren't really sure how to read him and what his leadership would mean for his country. And he has taken a big leap domestically with all the pressures he must face inside the military and from citizens as well in going out and meeting with the U.S. president. So it's, for me, one striking thing is sort of this constellation of things that have come together to make this unprecedented meeting happen. The second point I would make is I think this is a relationship we're going to see develop over years, over months and years. I mean, we've seen previous presidents who've had very important personal relationships, whether it was Clinton and Yeltsin or Reagan and Gorbachev. But, you know, we're seeing sort of opening moments in this fledgling friendship. And I expect they will meet maybe again in D.C. There's been suggested or at other third locations. But I think in this first meeting, it's really important to see what the trajectory of this relationship, this personal relationship between these two leaders is.
It's a good point, Willis. The idea that the South Koreans certainly saw an opportunity here to try to bridge this long-standing divide that has existed between the United States and the North Koreans. And we've talked about the role of China here. I wonder, one country we haven't talked about, Japan. How does Japan view what is happening today and what is potentially the future for the Korean Peninsula?
With real trepidation, because I think the Japanese are concerned that maybe there will be a deal that involves the kinds of weapons that are capable of hitting the U.S. mainland, maybe short of full verifiable denuclearization, you know, that he gets rid of the weapons that are capable of hitting San Francisco, but he keeps the weapons that are capable of hitting Tokyo. And despite the fact that President Trump has given Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe a lot of pledges that he's not going to leave the Japanese exposed, when push comes to shove, if they want a deal, I think the Japanese are very nervous. I think the Chinese would like to have had a representative probably here, and you know they're not present in the room either. But I think the Japanese probably are feeling especially vulnerable, watching very closely to see exactly, to go beyond the body language and the optics in the theater, to see exactly what they're talking about. And they're going to parse this language from future press conferences and future tweets very carefully.
It's a good point that Willis and Gabe make, Ambassador, because, and again, I'm just sort of, we're trying to game this out because we really don't know, but I wonder, we talked about Japan, and Japan is a strong ally of the United States. The president just left the meeting with several of our strong allies, and we all know the result of that G7 meeting. Here, we know that the president really wants a win on North Korea, and that is to the benefit of the United States. It's the benefit of the world, and I think everybody understands that. But if it means, on one hand, facing this because we, the United States meaning, will be able to ascertain and to gain some insights into who they are and their capabilities and the opening up of that country at the detriment of a country like Japan, a staunch ally of the United States. Perhaps is that one of the other reasons why Japan may be looking at this with a little bit of worry?
Well, I think Japan obviously is concerned, and we saw the recent visit of Prime Minister Abe to Washington. But I don't see us going in that direction. I think Japan knows that the U.S. is very concerned about Japan's security. I mean, we have over 50,000 troops in Japan. There's no question Japan is key. It's not only a key ally, but key to our defensive position in the region. So I think Japan appreciates that we will not leave them behind, but they are concerned about things like missile delivery systems that was just mentioned. We're talking about intercontinental ballistic missiles that can touch the U.S. Well, Japan is looking at no-dong missiles that can touch Japan. So when we talk about an agreement on missile delivery systems, they would like to include the no-dongs. When we talk about issues like human rights that we feel so strongly and we will persist, Japan is very concerned about the abductee issue, where in the past, if you will, the North Koreans abducted a number of Japanese nationals, and they've never fessed up to the true number. And Shinzo Abe needs the number, and he needs to resolve that issue. So these are issues that Japan wants the U.S. to work on, and I think we're working on them, and we will work on them, because Japan is too great an ally. We have to be totally in sync with Japan, and certainly South Korea. And I'll end on this point, because I think North Korea would love to see a wedge between the U.S. and Japan and a wedge between the U.S. and South Korea. We have to be doubly diligent when we look to our allies, certainly in Japan and in South Korea.
Yes, Willis.
Yeah, one quick point here. We're focused on denuclearization for obvious reasons. If North Korea gave away all its nuclear weapons tomorrow, this is still one of the largest standing armies in the world. They've got a 1 million-man military. Seoul is well within range of all sorts of conventional weapons. And as the ambassador was saying, Japan is well within range of a lot of this, too. If we're going all the way with this, if we're talking about a whole new relationship between North Korea and its neighbors in the outside world, obviously you want to start with the nuclear weapons. But that's only the start, right, unfortunately. And this is one of the reasons why I wish that I could be as optimistic as the ambassador is about a lot of this. But, you know, reality is Kim Jong-un knows very well he's still got a plenty big military and a plenty big credible threat against South Korea, against the 28,500 U.S. troops stationed there, against Japan. And what about that, what about that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, Gabe, do we continue, depending on how these talks go and what comes out of it, do we continue to hold, for example, those military exercises in the theater, knowing that that is usually perceived by the North Koreans as a threat to them, as a message to them? Or is that one of the things, could we conceivably pull that back? We're not going to remove our troops from the Korean Peninsula or from Okinawa or from Japan, but could we conceivably say, we won't hold those military exercises?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big questions, is what the level of concessions is going to be from the U.S. side for things like processes towards denuclearization. I mean, I think you could see the South Koreans call for a halt to the nuclear exercises. They've done that in the past, and that was one issue that was contested in the lead up to this summit about whether it was going to happen, was the North Koreans upset about military exercises. But that is a big question, as Willis rightly points out, that there's not only a nuclear arms issue, but there's a conventional military issue on the peninsula, both between South Korea and the North, but also the surrounding countries, and how that plays out and how that's negotiated is going to be essential as well.
So, Ambassador, to you then, we've talked about some of the things that North Korea can expect to benefit from, including those tied around economics. But I wonder what concessions, knowing that you've participated in talks like this, what concessions could the United States conceivably make?
Well, you know what? A number of the issues we put in the joint statement of September 2005 from the Six Party Talks addressed some of those, but indeed a non-aggression pact. We're talking about ending the Korean War with a peace treaty. The establishment of liaison offices in our respective capitals as we move towards a more normal relationship, so to open the dialogue. And then, given that, the foreign direct investment that would be flowing in. But when you look at movement towards a more normal relationship with the U.S., that immediately lends itself to the question of security assurances. Because as they get closer to the U.S. and eventually, all things equal, to include human rights issues, illicit activity issues, if and when there's normalization, then one would say, okay, those joint military exercises, if you're looking at those exercises, they would be put on, I would think they would be put on the table. But presently, that's an issue between the U.S. and South Korea. Mm-hmm. And I think the North Koreans know, we've told them that often, do not talk about our military presence in South Korea. It's not your business. It's between South Korea and the U.S. And the same thing for the joint military exercises. They're defensive in response to a threatening North Korea, and it's between the U.S. and South Korea. But as we normalize, as we come together, obviously all these issues will be put on the table.
And so, Ambassador, in the wake of this historic meeting, what would be an indication to you that this time around the North Koreans, this was going to be different than in all previous times? And I'm talking about something that they could announce and complete within the next, let's say, 6 months to a year. Okay.
I would say, and continue the moratorium, no more missile launches, no more nuclear tests. That's totally off the table. But a declaration. An immediate declaration of their nuclear weapons, their facilities, and their personnel, a very comprehensive one, and signing a verification protocol that meets the IAEA standards, safeguard standards, to include, if you will, those authorities for the monitors to leave declared nuclear facilities to inspect non-declared suspect nuclear facilities, which is why we failed with the joint statement of 2005. They would not sign up to that type of a verification regime. Signing up to that regime and coming in with a comprehensive declaration as to their nuclear universe, their facilities and their personnel and their weapons, I think that's a key first step while you're keeping the moratorium on missile launches and nuclear tests.
The President of the United States in a historic meeting with the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. They are at a working lunch right now. The president, through a campaign of maximum pressure, increased economic sanctions, is doing something that no sitting U.S. president has ever done. Meeting with the leader of North Korea. We're going to take a quick break. We will have much more summit coverage in a moment. The president, as we say, and the leader of North Korea are at this working lunch. We've got pictures from that. We'll play them for you. One thing that might not come up, though, is Pyongyang's notorious cyber program. We'll break that down. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.